Yeah, a brief follow-up on why did Ettore Majorana disappear. And the very last day in Sicily, I had a very interesting conversation with our landlord, who was a retired police colonel. And he said that Ettore Majorana for many years lived as a monk in some hidden place in Calabria. And even Paolo Borsellino, the famous judge, knew him personally. So that lends a little bit credibility to the hypothesis that it was a voluntary retirement.
What Unzica just described is not a mystery, it is a deletion. The Ettore Majorana Center in Eris, Sicily, stands where a genius once worked, and the name on that building is the only thing they could not erase. You already feel it. That pull toward a truth that institutional physics keeps just out of reach. Majorana didn't disappear, he was removed, and what he left behind, his final lecture, will be revealed before this video ends. There is a pattern running underneath civilization, underneath physics, underneath every tradition that has ever tried to describe what consciousness is and where it goes. Once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. And Ettore Majorana saw it first in the language of equations. Here is what you need to understand before we go deeper. Majorana was not a fringe theorist. He was not a mystic writing in metaphor. He was the most rigorous mathematical mind in Enrico Fermi's circle, and Fermi himself said that was saying something extraordinary. Majorana worked at the absolute frontier of quantum field theory in the 1930s, in the years when the architecture of matter was being mapped for the first time. And somewhere inside that mapping, he found something that the field was not ready to contain. The thesis of everything you are about to hear is this: the universe does not erase, it transforms. Majorana's equations did not just describe a particle, they described a principle that, once you follow it all the way to its conclusion, reframes what death actually is, not an ending. A transformation that preserves the essential pattern. Stay with me through this entire thing. I need you here for what is coming. Because at around 15 minutes into this video, we are going to open the content of that final lecture. The lecture that was scheduled. The lecture that never happened. The lecture whose subject matter is the reason Majorana had to vanish. And when you hear what he was about to say, it will not feel like physics anymore. It will feel like a map of something you have always suspected, but never had the language for. This reframes death itself. That is not a promise I make lightly. Stay with me. Let's name the layer we are standing on right now. This is the layer of quantum architecture, the structural mathematics of reality at its most fundamental level. And inside that architecture, Majorana found something that no one before him had the precision to articulate. A class of particle that is its own antiparticle. Not similar to its antiparticle. Not paired with its antiparticle. Identical to it. In conventional quantum field theory, every particle has a corresponding antiparticle. An electron has a positron. When they meet, they annihilate. They cancel each other into pure energy and disappear. That is the standard model of matter. Existence is conditional. Everything has an opposite that can erase it. That is the physics of impermanence, and it maps almost perfectly onto every materialist assumption about consciousness, that awareness is a temporary configuration, a pattern that runs until its opposite arrives, and then it is gone. Majorana fermions do not follow that rule. A Majorana fermion is a particle for which the antiparticle and the particle are the same entity. There is no opposite. There is nothing that can arrive and cancel it out. The annihilation event that ends every other particle simply does not apply. And this is not a philosophical claim. This is a mathematical structure that Ettore Majorana derived in 1937 and published in the journal Il Nuovo Cimento. It is documented. It is peer-reviewed. It is, in the language of mainstream physics, real. Now, here is the decode move, and I need you to feel the weight of this. A self-antiparticle is not just a physics curiosity. It is a blueprint. It is the universe's own equation for something that cannot be annihilated. Something that, by its very structure, has no cancelling opposite. Something that persists not because it is protected from outside, but because its architecture contains no mechanism for self-erasure. What if consciousness is that structure? Not metaphorically, structurally. What if awareness, the field of pure subjectivity that you experience as being alive, is not a product of matter the way heat is a product of friction? What if it is a Majorana-class phenomenon, a self-referencing, self-antiparticle field that cannot be annihilated because it has no antiparticle to meet? Enrico Fermi, who built the first nuclear reactor, who is on the short list of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, said this about Majorana. He said there are various categories of scientists in the world. There are those of second and third rank who do their best but never get very far. There are those of first rank who make important discoveries fundamental to scientific progress. And then there are the geniuses, like Galileo and Newton. Majorana was one of these. Fermi said Majorana had what no one else had. Fermi said this about a man who then vanished from the face of the earth. That is not a footnote, that is a signal. Now, the Vedic tradition, one of the oldest documented knowledge systems on Earth, described something structurally identical to the Majorana fermion thousands of years before quantum field theory existed. They called it Atman. The Atman in Advaita Vedanta is not the personal self. It is not the ego, not the body, not the stream of thoughts. It is the witnessing awareness that underlies all of those. And its defining characteristic, stated explicitly in the Upanishads, is that it cannot be cut, cannot be burned, cannot be wetted, cannot be dried. It has no opposite that can cancel it. It is self-referencing, non-local, and eternal not because someone decided it should be, but because its nature contains no mechanism for its own negation. The Vedic sages encoded the Majorana principle in a different language. Majorana encoded the Vedic principle in equations. The convergence is not a coincidence, it is a pattern. And patterns that appear independently across thousands of years and radically different epistemological frameworks are not beliefs. They are discoveries. Here is the civilizational consequence of that. Every tradition that has ever described an immortal soul, Egyptian Ka, Pythagorean Psyche, Sufi Ru, the Atman of Vedanta, was not inventing comfort against the fear of death. They were reporting an observation about the structure of awareness itself, that it behaves like a Majorana class field, that it is its own ground, that it references itself and in doing so, removes itself from the category of things that can be annihilated. Majorana's 1937 paper was the first time that observation had been expressed in the formal language of modern physics. And within a year, he was gone. Actually, no. Let me say that again more precisely. Within a year of publishing the equation that mathematically described a phenomenon with no cancelling opposite, an indestructible architecture, the man who wrote it ceased to exist in any officially recorded way. The equation survived, the man did not. Or at least, that is what the record shows. But here's what they don't tell you. The equation pointed somewhere specific, somewhere that had implications far beyond particle physics. And the content of the lecture Majorana was preparing to deliver before he vanished, that is where this equation was going to land. Here is the layer most people never reach. The brain is not generating your consciousness, it is receiving it. That distinction sounds subtle. It is not. It is the difference between believing you are a candle that gets snuffed out and knowing you are the electricity running through the wire. The candle dies, the current does not. Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff spent decades building the case for exactly this. Their orchestrated objective reduction model, OR, proposes that consciousness is not produced by neurons firing in sequence like a biological computer. It is produced by quantum processes occurring inside structures called microtubules, tiny protein cylinders inside every neuron in your brain. And here is what makes that extraordinary. Microtubules operate at the scale where quantum effects become possible. Where matter and geometry and information blur into one another, Penrose argued that these structures are literally interfacing with the fabric of space-time itself, not metaphorically. Structurally, your brain, at its most fundamental level, is a quantum antenna tuned to a field that exists beyond the body. So what happens when the antenna breaks? The signal does not stop. The signal was never coming from the antenna. Now consider the near-death literature. Cardiologist Pim van Lommel conducted one of the most rigorous prospective studies ever done on cardiac arrest survivors, published in The Lancet in 2001. What he found was that patients were reporting coherent, structured, verifiable awareness during periods when their brains showed zero measurable electrical activity, not reduced activity, zero. The brain was clinically offline, and yet something was observing, something was aware, something was recording details that could later be confirmed. The receiver had gone dark. The consciousness had not gone anywhere. Actually, no. Let me say that again, because this is the piece that changes everything. The consciousness did not go anywhere because it was never fully inside the receiver to begin with. The Tibetan Book of the Dead understood this, thousands of years before Penrose wrote a single equation. That text, the Bardo Thodol, is not a religious comfort for the grieving. It is a technical manual, a step-by-step map of what happens to awareness as it navigates the collapse sequence after physical death. The Tibetan masters who encoded it were describing the exact process that Ochoa now gives us a quantum mechanical framework to understand. The dissolution of the receiver. The persistence of the signal. The stages of luminosity that awareness moves through when it is no longer filtered through biological hardware. They called it the clear light of the Dharmata. Penrose might call it a return to space-time geometry. They are describing the same architecture from opposite sides of the same door. This is the decode move. Consciousness is not a product of matter. Consciousness is the field that matter briefly learns to tune. Your brain is not the source. It is the most sophisticated receiver that biological evolution has yet produced. And like any receiver, it can be upgraded, it can be damaged, it can be switched off. None of those events touch the signal. Ettore Majorana knew this, not as metaphor, as physics. The Majorana fermion, a particle that is its own antiparticle, is a mathematical description of something that cannot be destroyed by the collision between matter and its opposite. It simply reorganizes. It persists. He was not just describing an exotic subatomic curiosity, he was building a formal proof that certain configurations of information are, by their very structure, immortal. And the lecture he was preparing to deliver in the spring of 1938 was going to show exactly how that principle applied to consciousness itself. But here is what the record never told you. He never got to deliver it. And the question of why he vanished on the night of March 25th is not a historical footnote. It is the final chapter of the proof. Now we reach the layer where history stops cooperating. March 25th, 1938. Ettore Majorana boards a ship in Naples. His destination is Palermo. He is carrying a letter. 2 letters, actually. One to his family, one to his director at the Naples Institute of Physics, Antonio Carelli. The letter to Carelli says he has decided to abandon everything. It reads like a farewell. Carelli is alarmed. He telegraphs back. And then something strange happens. Majorana sends a second letter, almost immediately, walking back the first. He says, "Do not worry." He says he will return. He boards the ship. He arrives in Palermo. He is seen at his hotel. And then, on the return voyage to Naples, he is simply gone. No body, no confirmed sightings, no explanation that has ever fully held. For decades, the case sat in the archive of unsolved disappearances. A tragedy, a possible suicide. The kind of story that gets a footnote in physics history and then disappears itself. But in 2015, the Rome Attorney's Office reopened the investigation. And what they found was not a body. What they found was a life. Evidence placing Majorana in Venezuela, living under the name Bini, for years after 1938. A photograph emerged. Handwriting analysis was conducted. The conclusion of the inquiry was not death. It was voluntary exile. A man who had chosen to vanish. So here is the question that the official record still refuses to answer cleanly. Why would the most brilliant physicist of his generation, a man Fermi said had the gifts of Newton himself, why would that man walk away from everything at the precise moment his most significant work was about to be delivered? Was it fear? Possibly. 1938 is the year Mussolini signs the racial laws. Italy is tightening. Europe is darkening. A man with Majorana's sensitivity might well have looked at what was coming and chosen disappearance over complicity. Or was it something else? Was it that the lecture he was preparing to give had implications that someone, somewhere, understood before he delivered it? Was it that a formal proof connecting quantum field behavior to the survival of consciousness would not have been welcomed by the institutions that needed matter to be all there was? Here is the decode move. The disappearance is not a gap in the record. The disappearance is the final lecture, delivered in the only language they could not suppress. Silence. Absence. A body that was never found because it walked out of the story on its own terms. Majorana did not fail to complete his work. He completed it in the most radical way available to him. He demonstrated the principle. A man who understood that consciousness is non-local, that certain configurations of information cannot be annihilated, chose to become the proof rather than publish it. He stepped out of the frame, and the frame has never recovered. The record shows a vanishing. What the record cannot show is what he knew when he stepped onto that ship, what he had already written in the mathematics, what he understood about the nature of the self that made disappearance not a tragedy but a demonstration. You now hold what they tried to bury, not a mystery, a message, and the message is encoded in the structure of reality itself, waiting for anyone willing to read it. Here is where this lands for you directly. You are not a mortal body waiting for an ending. You are a non-local excitation in a field that does not terminate. That is not poetry. That is the physics Majorana was pointing toward. When you understand that, you stop being a victim of circumstances and start being a sovereign expression of something that cannot be erased. That knowledge is not passive. It changes how you move, how you choose, how you face what comes. If something in this initiation struck a frequency in you, leave it in the comments. Your insights genuinely deepen this for everyone here. This is a living inquiry, not a closed lecture. What comes next in this series moves into sacred geometry and the neurochemistry of mystical states, the mechanisms behind direct experience of what Majorana encoded in the math. Majorana did not vanish, he demonstrated. And so do you. Every time you remember what you actually are. See you at dawn. If something in this unlocked a layer, leave it below. Your insight becomes part of the living field. And if you're continuing the initiation, the next step is already waiting. The pattern never vanishes. Neither do you.